Hello again, Booktube. Today I would like to do the Muppet Book Tag. Originally from Gareth at Book Songs and Magic, but I was actually tagged by Aaron at Aaron Read a Book or Aaron Read a Book. I guess we'll just never know, but thanks for the tag, Aaron. In this tag, each Muppet character prompts a bookish question. The Muppets originated in TV in the 1950s, and living in South Africa as I did as a youngster, television only arrived in our shores in the late 1970s. So the Muppets and I never really intersected in their first iteration, but largely thanks to John Denver, I found them along the way. I never actually became a huge Muppets fan, and I admit the character list of Muppets we're going to rattle through here in questions 1 to 10 are not even familiar to me. But any excuse for a book chat, and each of them prompts a bookish question. The first question is based off Kermit the Frog, and it says, name a book with a great leader. Now, coming from my corner of the world, there probably can only be one answer to that, and that's Nelson Mandela's autobiography, The Long Walk to Freedom. I'm not sure what hasn't already been said about both Mr. Mandela and the book, but it is a fascinating chronicle of a journey of a life well lived with purpose, and perhaps what singles him out apart from all the other accolades that you may be familiar with is, of course, he's probably the only politician in history who voluntarily refused to run for a second term in order to promote the concept of democracy in a continent that still had some way to go to prove a good track record of democracy. The other thing I will share from my corner of the world is that, of course, the ANC, his political party, was banned for most of my life growing up, and it was illegal in South Africa to display even an image of Nelson Mandela. Consequently, there was only one image floating around most of the protest movements, etc., which had been taken ahead of his incarceration following the Rivonia trials. The second question is prompted by Fozzie Bear, and it says, name a book that makes you laugh. I'm going to pick a slightly unusual book here. It's called The CRICKLEWOOD Dome, and it's a series of short stories or short articles by the late lamented Alan Coren. Alan Coren was the editor of Punch magazine, a fantastic humorous magazine that no longer, unfortunately, exists. Alan Coren's also the father of the fantastic Victoria Coren Mitchell, who's the wife of the brilliant David Mitchell. So there is a legacy of brilliant minds and brilliant writers and brilliant creators floating all around here. But the reason I'm picking this particular book is it is just one of the funniest bits of writing I've ever seen. One of the tales in this book is it's called Fairy Tale, and it's about the struggle to get ready for Christmas and the shenanigans goes on relating to where is that Christmas fairy that goes on the top of the tree that I'm sure we packed away properly last year and now we can't find. I'll just read you a very short excerpt to give you a feel of the writing. She was born to ding-dong merrily on high. That was her life's work. That was the career her creator had marked out for her, 10,000 miles from Cricklewood. You will be flown to Cricklewood, he murmured, tenderly but firmly. You will be placed on high, and once you are up there, you will ding-dong merrily. And a little while later, when he buys the fairy. So I gave him a tenner and took her home. She said nothing in the car. She said nothing when I put her on the tree. And then, after another 10 minutes, she sang ding-dong merrily on high. After another 10 minutes, she was still singing it. I took her down again, and with the technical expertise I have, shook her. She did not stop. I tapped her lightly against the banister. Ding-dong merrily on high, she sang. This was bad news. There were 21 days to go to 12th night. If that isn't some of the funniest writing, then I don't know what is. Moving on, the third question is about animal. Name a book that is unpredictable. Here again, I'm going to go a little bit left field, because the book I've chosen is called The Shortest History of Israel and Palestine. The reason I've chosen this under the heading of unpredictable is, of course, the situation is completely unpredictable. When I was growing up, there were three global conflicts that needed to be resolved. Apartheid South Africa, the Troubles in Northern Ireland, and of course the conflict in the Middle East. Now, I witnessed during my lifetime the resolution of the political challenge in South Africa in the early 90s and the Good Friday Agreement, which ended the troubles in Northern Ireland. But the conflict in the Middle East rages on and on with no obvious solution in sight. And both sides seem to be constantly hardening in their positions, and it's very hard, therefore, to get hold of reliable, non-partisan information. This is a 242-page book, which is a concise, unbiased, historically accurate summary for the reader who wants to understand how we got where we are now. And I would recommend it to anyone who simply wants to understand the huge complexity of the current problem. I'll say no more about it than that. Question 4. Statler and Waldorf. Name a book that had to win you over. I have to say, this is an easy one for me because this is a book I was almost certain I was not going to read. Gabriel Garcia Marquez's 100 Years of Solitude. The reason I wasn't going to read this book is I don't like fantasy books and I don't like magical realism. So I thought, why would I read this? But slowly I started on my journey as I'm traveling through literature and trying to discover the things I really ought to read. And I saw that Marquez had won the Nobel Prize for Literature for this book in 1982. And then Salman Rushdie referred to this particular book as the greatest novel in any language over the last 50 years. And I thought, gosh, that's high praise. So I read it, and he's right. I would say to you, if you haven't read it, you must read it. The language, the imagery, is one of the most unusual things I've ever read. And of course, it also has one of the most famous opening lines in literature, which I will read you from the back page. Many years later, as he faced the firing squad, Colonel Aureliano Buendia was to remember that distant afternoon when his father took him to discover ice. It also contains a 1,300-word single sentence that runs for 4 pages. I won't spoil it for you. You need to read it for yourself. It is truly a unique reading experience, and I am the richer for having read it. Question 5. It's about Ernie, and it says, name a character that is innocent or naive or both. Here I've selected a very different book. This is My Dark Vanessa by Kate Elizabeth Russell. It's an intriguing book that shifts the narrative constantly backwards and forwards between the year 2000 and the year 2017. And the point of that is that our protagonist, Vanessa, is alternatively a 15-year-old or a 32-year-old in the two time frames. The shift in those 2 years is important because times and standards and norms shifted a lot during that period, including things like the Me Too movement and a much greater awareness of the politics of the patriarchy. I'll read you from the back cover and you'll get the idea. Vanessa Y. was 15 years old when she first had sex with her English teacher. Now the teacher, Jacob Strain, has been accused of sexual abuse by another former student, and a journalist has asked Vanessa to contribute to the story about him. But no one seems to understand that what Vanessa and Strain had together wasn't abuse. It was love, wasn't it? A very intelligent, sensitive, and nuanced read on a very complex and concerning subject. Question 6 talks about Gonzo the Great and says, name a book that defies simple genre definitions. So what have I chosen? I've chosen Philip Roth's Portnoy's Complaint. Where to start with this book? It certainly does defy easy categorization. It was my introduction to Philip Roth. I've since read The Plot Against America, which is a much more normal style, following a linear narrative story. But this is a very well written, in the style of a whining stream of consciousness monologue by an oppressed Jewish teenager. Alexander Portnoy struggles to balance the competing forces of his strong ethics, his sexual longings, his overbearing saintly Jewish mother, his feelings of guilt and repression as an utterly American and deeply Jewish kid growing up in Newark in 1950s America. Definitely a reading experience. Once read, never forgotten. Question 7 is Dr. Bunsen Honeydew. It says, name a book with a great concept. So I've chosen to talk about The Promise by Damon Galgut. He's a local South African author, and this novel won the 2021 Booker Prize. It's a book I don't hear much talked about on BookTube, and I would like in my small ways to try and change that, because I think it's a simply outstanding novel. Galgut compares South Africa's struggle to sustain the new South Africa promise in a novel that's set both in pre- and post-apartheid South Africa, and it takes the concept of the promise both of the country and in its new democratic freedom, as well as a more particular promise and several promises that apply to the individual characters in the book. It's simply a brilliant piece of writing, as good as anything I've seen coming out of South Africa. But let me, rather than trying to articulate, let me read you the review I actually wrote on Amazon about this book. As a South African who lived through the time periods of this novel, from the 80s to the present, it resonated strongly, not only in terms of the depiction of time and place, but also in the rich delineation of the characters, all of which one instantly recognizes from everyday South Africa. A compelling storyline which perfectly captured the imperfect characters, drives the reader forward, but what lifts this novel into a class of its own, one rightly recognized by the 2021 Booker Prize, is the writing style where our narrator shifts from first to third person, even within the confined space of a single sentence, even breaking the fourth wall to engage directly with the reader. Equally, within a phrase or two, one has relocated from one character in a location to another in a separate setting, almost without pausing for breath. These slightly unnerving changeabilities in style and setting emulate brilliantly the uniqueness of daily life in South Africa, where the next events are seemingly in the hands of unseen undercurrents that pull the protagonists in different directions. Brilliantly written, it is an enriching reading experience, well deserving the accolades it has received. Highly recommended both to those who will recognize the feelings and experiences, but also for those who wish to better understand the impact of its unique history on those who struggle to come to terms with it in post-liberation South Africa. That's Damon Galgut's The Promise. Well worth a read. Question 8. Dr. Teeth. Name a character that lights up the scene and makes you smile. I'm afraid I'm going to be very unoriginal here, and I'm going to choose Elizabeth Bennet from Pride and Prejudice, because she really does. She's an absolute delight throughout the novel, and she's one of those women where you just think, that's what women should be like. Go girl. I don't think I can add a lot to what's already been said endlessly and in many, many, many platforms about Pride and Prejudice, so I'll press on. Question 9 is about Rolf the dog, a character that's laid back and copes with the chaos around them. Now here, I don't actually have the physical book with me because I want to do a throwback to my childhood and reference Paddington Bear, the book originally written by Michael Bond about the bear from darkest Peru. Paddington is polite, he's kind, he's honest, he's well-intentioned, and he's actually quietly stoic, even when the misunderstandings result in complete chaos around him. And not that it's a competition, but how many of the Muppets got to have high tea with the Queen? Question 10 is about the collection of Muppets. It says, name a book with a great found family. Here again, my choice may strike you as a little bit odd. I'm going to choose F. Scott Fitzgerald, Tender is the Night. There is a found family in this book, but I'm not sure it's the positive, uplifting found family that perhaps is implied in the question. In this book, the found family consists of Dick Diver, a doctor, and his wife, and we subsequently learn, a patient, Nicole Warren, with whom the young Rosemary develops a friendship. This found family is not sustainable, however, because feelings develop between Rosemary and Dick and Nicole's relationship is in any event both complex and slowly unraveling. Dick is a medical man, similar to Charles Bovary in Madame Bovary or Tertius Lydgate in Middlemarch. The novel charts some people's recovery while others simultaneously decline, as masks slip and social conventions are tested. The writing is exquisite. When Rosemary is sitting in a houseboat cafe on the Seine, we get this line: "The river shimmered with lights from the bridges and cradled many cold moons." And later, this passage: "They inspected the tart at the bar, granting her the minimum of interest exacted by her profession, and she stared back with bright boldness. They went through the deserted lobby, oppressed by draperies holding Victorian dust in stuffy folds, and they nodded at the night concierge, who returned the gesture with a bitter civility peculiar to night servants." It's a deeply engaging study of complex, slightly world-weary people, frantically keeping up appearances, as one must do in the jazz era of the Roaring Twenties. Highly recommended. In fact, I'll go out on a limb and say I think it's better than The Great Gatsby, but that's just my opinion. So, those are my 10 Muppets, for what it's worth. I hope that was interesting. I'd love to hear your thoughts on any of the books I've mentioned. Please feel free to strongly disagree with me. Reading is a very personalized activity, and I think part of the fun of this community is to hear each other's views. So thank you very much. I guess I'm supposed to tag a whole lot of readers going forward. I'm not sure that I'm going to do better than has already been done. I've seen long lists of tags going out, but please, as was extended to me, the courtesy, please consider this an invitation to do the tag. I do think tags are a brilliant way to get readers just to talk about books they love, and the questions, as I understand them, are just a way to get a book onto the top of the list. So thank you very much, BookTube, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye-bye. Many years later, as he faced the firing squad, Colonel Orlando... Many years later, as he faced the firing squad, Colonel Aureliano Buendia, Colonel Aureliano Buendia, no, that's not right either. Colonel Aureliano, Many years later, as he faced the firing squad, Colonel Aureliano, this is not happening, guys. Many years later, as he faced the firing squad, Colonel I can't do this.